My name is Georgina Shanley, and I am the South Jersey coordinator for Amnesty International for the last 30 years. So it's a real privilege and a real honor to be here to talk about this subject, because that's what's really missing, is there has not been any real discussion face to face. So tonight I would like to divide it into three parts. Number one, what's happening today, now, in Gaza and the West Bank. And the second part is how we got here, what led us to this. And the third is, how is this affecting our civil rights and our rights to dissent? And it's happening all over the world. So hopefully I will fit in all that has to be said. And after I'm done, we can have, I'm really looking forward to the discussion part. And I'd ask to hold questions if possible, just hold questions until the end, because the humanists are renowned for being sidetracked and talking about other issues for 2 days in a row.
That's how we got here.
That's how we got here. So anyway, so I will begin. Thank you very much for coming. The title of this presentation is called The Tragedy of Palestine. And it's been going on for a long time. And it's right now, the latest crisis began on October 7th, when about 3,000 Hamas people, militants, broke into the Israeli section, and they killed and took hostage. They killed 1,139 people, innocent people, people in kibbutzes, people at a concert, and people on the way. And they also took about 240 people as hostages, young and old. So this was a very, very strong wake-up call that something was going on, that something was wrong. And people say that this, why did this suddenly happen? But it has been building up for many, many years, and just even last year, 2023, there are a list of different pogroms, they're called, that happened to the Palestinians. On March 1st, 2023, hundreds of Palestinians, this is before this happened, so people think, okay, this just happened in a vacuum. Hundreds of Palestinians in the occupied West Bank were injured by mobs of armed Israeli settlers who burned homes to the ground and lit vehicles on fire. March 8th, top official in the Israeli government, Mr. Smotrich, calls for the destruction of Palestine villages of Huara, and he is looking for an Israeli government policy there to take the Palestinians from their land. And in June 21st, 2023, the Israeli cabinet gave this man the power to construct 4,500 new illegal settlements in Palestine land. And yesterday there was good news. There were 4 Israeli hostages rescued, released. But on the same day, and it's very important to know this, and I come to this from a human rights perspective. I am not a political person at all. I am only involved in human rights. And so anybody who wishes to check or find out where information comes from, I would be very happy to relay that. So yesterday I was on a Zoom call with Amnesty and South Africa Live to talk about how apartheid ended there. And so right in the middle of it, we got a little message saying, Because I'm sure you know that in al-Nusrat in central Gaza yesterday, 210 people were killed. And how many more? And 400 injured. And a pediatric surgeon at a hospital said it was just a bloodbath. So back to the backstory is, this is what happened. We got this message with the video that an American force, used an aid truck. The aid truck came from the American pier to al-Nusrat camp, and it shows the video and photo. A clash erupted with the American force once it was discovered. Airstrikes were conducted on the al-Nusrat market, which was full of civilians, to create a path for the rescue truck. This resulted in the massacre of over 150 civilians who were at the market, and then the force headed back to where it came from, and warplanes bombed everything in its path. So that's the other little side that we don't hear about, but it's the truth. So today in Gaza, up to date now, we have 78,000 people killed, mostly women and children. And the World Food Organization has just said on June 1st that by mid-July, up to 1 million people will die of starvation. And these numbers are very hard to come to grips with because they're so large. And 90% of the children in Gaza are malnourished. They don't have enough food for growth. So, and just a background for the size and where Gaza is. Gaza is in Israel, and it is okay. So here's the Gaza Strip, and there's the West Bank, which is much bigger, and it's in Israel. It's surrounded by Jordan and Lebanon. Syria is just there, and Egypt. And Rafah is at the bottom, and there's a crossing, the Rafah crossing that goes into Egypt, and it was used a lot because the one going into Israel has been very difficult. Can we hold on? Yeah, I'll take your question in a minute. Okay,
This
so
is the blowout map. You wanted to talk about the crossing, right?
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm just giving you this map. You wanted to talk about the crossing.
All right, well, it's fine.
Okay.
Well, the crossing is where most of the aid, and Rafah was the last holdout. That's where people were given leaflets saying, you should move north, you should move east, you should move west, you should move south. And so the last big holding was in the south of Israel, where over 2 million people were. And even Biden said, don't do anything. The UN said don't bomb them. But, it takes on a life of its own, or a death of its own. So that, okay, so today we have up to date, okay, so Gaza is 25 miles long, 25, and about 6 miles wide, and is about the size of Philadelphia or Detroit. And the West Bank is about the size of Delaware. So, up to date right now, or at the beginning of the year, 70,000 tons of bombs have been dropped on Gaza. This is more than a combination of what was dropped on Hamburg, London, and Dresden combined. So Gaza City is one of the oldest, or was one of the oldest cities in the world, and it had rare documents, museums, it had an orchestra, beautiful orchestra, and a lot of intellectuals, writers and poets, and it had a 97.3 literacy rate in Gaza. The UN has been, because most of the population are refugees, either from recent refugees, or else they are from 1948, the Nakba, the catastrophe. They're generations later, generations descendants from the people who had to flee. In Gaza, all the exits are locked. All the exits are locked. So you can't get out. In Ireland, we had a famine, and we had a few million people died of hunger, but probably a lot of you had ancestors who were able to flee Ireland, to get out of there and start a new life. In Gaza, they can't. It's like a large open-air prison where people are starving. So, where did it begin? I think I can tell you statistics like journalists have been targeted. 254 journalists have died. Medical workers have been, oh my God, specifically targeted and treated in exceptionally brutal manner. Some of the surgeons from Al-Shifa Hospital had to strip down to their underwear, have their hands and feet shackled and blindfolded, and they were taken in a truck to prison. One of them was the head of the Department of Orthopedics, and he was 58 and he had a few children, and he died under torture in an Israeli prison. So, and this is what's going on in Gaza. It's like a cry for help. Nobody likes violence of any kind, whoever is doing it, whether it's the Americans in Vietnam, whether it's Hamas doing it. Nobody wants to have violence. And all people want is a decent kind of life, a dignity in life. So, 37,000 people killed and about 82,000 injured, and many more bodies under the rubble. They have no water that's potable. They have very little electricity. Medicine, forget about it. Houses, forget about it. Many of them have diseases now because of very bad sanitation. And somebody who was there could tell us that the smell in Gaza is awful. And a lot of the sewage is going into the sea. So the goal of Hamas is to take back Palestine into a sovereign state. That's the goal. And the present ceasefire goal is to release Palestinian hostages. There are prisoners, there are 10,000 prisoners in Israeli jails since October 7th. And I'll tell you about one. His name is Bassem Tamimi, and he's from the West Bank, and he was on a speaking tour. He's very well educated. He was on a speaking tour of the east coast of the United States, and he came to Ocean City, New Jersey, where we lived. And he did a great presentation to the community and to our Amnesty group. And he stayed for a few days to rest because we lived near the ocean. Every week in his little village of Nabi Salah in the West Bank, he held peaceful vigils. And a lot of young Jewish people participated. And on October 29th, after the recent Hamas attack, he was arrested. Nobody knows much about it. It appears that he was in a car. The car was stopped. He was taken out. And his wife does not know exactly where he is. Through Amnesty, we were able to find out that his prison is called Ramon Prison in Israel. And so a few weeks ago, we had a little connection, a phone connection with somebody from his village. And I asked about Tamimi, just if anybody. No, but this woman, Ozma's her name, she lives in the West Bank. She said that nobody knows where her husband's father's children are right now. And so she said, I said he was in Ramon prison, and she said that they had just had a few prisoners released from there, and they were in really bad condition. So, and the prison, I won't even go into it, the surgeon reported that in one of the prisons, I think it's called Timan, where Palestinian prisoners are shackled to the beds. It sounds so outrageous. Hand and feet, and blindfolded, and have diapers on, and are fed through straws. Some of them have lost their hands and feet because of the constriction of the handcuffs and the leg cuffs. And so I believe there was an expose on CNN with that, and there might have been an article in the New York Times, one of the rare ones, and rare articles out of Israel. And it may be closing down, but the Israeli government is not accountable for any of this. Who are they accountable to? There are about 200 children in prison. And with Bassem, or the fellow, the peace activist, what happens is he's taken to administrative detention, where there's a military panel. And some of the people on the panel are not qualified, like they might have been reservists, and so they make a decision. And so it's usually 99.9% the person is sentenced to 6 months under administrative detention. And then 6 months later, he has another hearing, and it's renewed, and most times it's renewed. So we tried to do a MoveOn.org before his hearing in April, his second hearing in April, to have people contact the Israeli embassy to ask for his release, or at least not to be tortured. And I actually have a petition out there. So they decided in April that he should get another six months. So he is still in the prison. And so 108 journalists have been killed in Gaza. 108 journalists. And one of the peers said, each time a journalist is killed, we lose fragments of the truth. And there are another 350 cases that are being looked into, because some of them have been arrested and some of them have just disappeared. So that's one of the big faults, is, like I said at the beginning, there's no discussion, there's no information. We're not getting anything except the young people, mostly, with some boomers in between, are able to go on social media and get videos directly from individuals in these communities. So, we all get the situation. But now I'd just like to go to part 2, which is, how did we get here? Okay, and I know I'm going to start, okay, so the Ottoman Empire ruled Palestine, amongst others, for 402 years, from 1516 to 1918. And during World War I, the Ottoman Empire were defeated. And so that was the end of the 402 reign of the empire. So Palestinians helped the Allies defeat the Ottomans, with the promise that they would be given their own sovereign state if they won. And so, in 1882, the first Jewish settlers came from Russia and from Romania. And they were people who are being persecuted. You know, there's always been that persecution. Maybe it's something to do with Christianity and that Jews were supposed to be the ones who killed Jesus. Who knows? Or maybe they were money lenders because none of the religions allowed money lending. And so whatever the reason was, some settlers started to come in 1882. And in 1896, Theodor Herzl, he issued a pamphlet on the state of Israel. And the following year, in 1897, there was the first Jewish Congress. And that was in Basel, in Switzerland. And they stated that they would like to have a Jewish state in Palestine. It should be a Jewish state. So then along comes now remember, the British were having a really tough time because a lot of their resources during the First World War, 1914 to 1918, a lot of the resources were being used up. And also Ireland was giving them a tough time. And there was a big uprising in Ireland in 1916. And actually after that, 1922, it still was a lot of British input in Ireland. So there was a lot of pesky little colonies all over the world. So they were kind of getting a little bit sick of what's happening in Palestine. What do we do with these people? So this Secretary of State of England in 1917, that's during the First World War, his name is Balfour, and I think he was like Lord Lieutenant of Ireland as well, but he issued a declaration. He wrote a letter to Baron Rothschild saying, I am willing to establish a Jewish state. And so that was, because they were desperate. They're desperate. What do we do? What do they do? So in 1920, about 16,500 Jewish settlers came in from Europe. And because of the go-ahead, the green light. And also in 1920, there was a peace conference, and wherever, there was a peace conference, and the British mandate to administer Palestine was directed by the League of Nations. So the Brits were to manage Palestine, and this was in 1920. And so they were asked to implement the Balfour Agreement, which was to make it into a Jewish state. So that was their walking orders. And this was pre-Nazi. This was a very tough time. There was a lot of tension in the European countries against Jews. And as more and more Europeans came in, and it wasn't like in America where somebody comes in, buys a house and you live next door and that's the end of it. What was happening was forceful displacement, and the Brits helped them. And then in 1936, it got to be too much for the Arab population. And the intellectuals and the writers and the newspaper people all were livid with what was happening. It was unbearable that whole communities were just razed to the ground. And then they had a revolt in 1936 to 1939. And it was very lopsided. The British had militia, paid militia, and the Jewish settlers had militia. The Zionists had militia. The Zionists are those who want to colonize. It's not necessarily it's anything to do with the Jewish religion. They wanted to colonize. So 1936-39 was the Arab Revolt. But then there was something, did anybody ever hear of the Peel Commission? P-E-E-L. In 1937, it was getting so out of hand for the British that they had a commission under the British government, with Peel was the leader, P-E-E-L, and they had to decide what to do next. And what he decided was Palestine should be divided into two. And so, in the meantime, all of these homes are being destroyed, people are being killed, and it was going to be Arab and Jew, and also from Jaffa to Jerusalem would be an international area. So that was a very intense time, and World War II, 1945, and things were getting really boiling point in Europe, and also in Palestine. And at that point, in 1947, the Arab population was 1.3 million. And the Jewish population was 630,000. So that was that. So what to do? So since the UN had just been formed, the British decided to appeal to the UN. What do we do with this? How can peace be brought about? What's the best settlement? And so the UN sent over a group of people to have a look, like a committee. None of them really spoke Arabic, and none of them had any idea of the history of the whole area. So they came over, probably in their suits, who knows, or whatever they were wearing, and they decided that they gave a report to the UN, and the offshoot of it was that the UN decided, Resolution 181 in 1947, that Israel should be divided. And so the population of Palestine at that time was 55% Arab and 45% Jewish. A lot of Arabs had been killed, and there had been huge increases in the number of people who were fleeing from Europe. And so there's 55 Arab and there were 1.3 million of Arabs in Palestine and 600 to 630,000 Jews. And so the UN decided that the way they're going to partition it is they're going to give 55% of the land to the Jews. Remember, they have 630 people, 30,000, and the Arabs are 1.3 million. 55% goes to the Jewish population, and 45% goes to the Arab, with an international, area, Jerusalem, etc., being international. And that it was decided with the UN that that area would be sorted out between the Jewish leaders and the Palestinian leaders, right? No worries, you just go ahead and figure it out, who gets what, who gets East Jerusalem, who gets West, who gets Al-Aqsa, who gets the whatever sacred site is there. Now remember, Jerusalem was the birthplace of three major religions: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And there are also other religions there, the Druze, many different little religions there in Palestine. So when this came out, that this is the way it was going to be, it was too much. Their land was being taken away. The promise that was given by the British that they'd have a sovereign state if they helped in the First World War, the promise was broken. And here they were going to be deprived again. And so there was fierce, fierce, fierce conflicts. And the result of it was, one result was that 90% of the Palestinian population it was 750,000 up to 900,000 were exiled. And many of them, I think 1/3 of them, ended up in Gaza. So they were the refugees. And now we have the descendants of the refugees as refugees in Gaza. So 78% of the land, then began the Nakba in 1948. Because of all of this going on and people being desperate, seeing everybody leaving, homes being destroyed, olive groves being destroyed, it was supposed to become a European settlement with Europeans. And so their very traditions were being destroyed. And so they asked other Arab countries to come in and help them. And so, to help them fight. And so that's where it began, with these countries being involved and trying to defend the Palestinian rights. And the countries were Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, I think it was 5 different countries came in. And in the year after, or a few months after, November 29th is when the UN decided to partition. 181 was the resolution. And a few months after, in May 1948, Israel was designated a state. And it ended up that 78% of the land was taken over, and 22% was what was left with international centers, the ones that would be neutral. So the Palestinians have never really had a homeland with all of this, since the end of the empire, or the Ottoman, probably even before that, even though they lived on that land, their ancestors lived on that land for many years. So Israel and Jordan controlled Gaza and the West Bank. That's the way it was. So it wasn't Israel. Egypt and Jordan controlled the West Bank, and 78% of the land was controlled by Israel.
Do you want those maps? Or?
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay. So there's a whole bunch of different maps.
Yeah.
Whoops.
Yeah, the beginning would be fine.
This set of maps will seem to be the most comprehensive.
So you can explain. What year was that? 1888, the red one?
Yeah, so this is the Ottoman period.
Yeah.
This is the Mandate period.
Yeah.
This is that UN plan that you
Resolution.
talked about,
Yeah.
where they tried to designate certain areas.
Yeah.
So where's Palestine on these?
Well, Israel is part of, Palestine. Yeah. Where is it on the map? That's basically Palestine. Those are the borders of the Mediterranean.
Yeah, so this during the British time period, they broke the area they were given as a mandate into what they continued to call Palestine and what they called Transjordan, the other side of the Jordan River.
Okay.
Okay. And so this is 2005 to 2023. Okay. So after there was much conflict all along, there was so much disturbance and destruction right up to 1947 of the Arabs. It wasn't just one sudden war that happened after the UN resolution. So the next step, from 1948 to 1967, Egypt and Jordan controlled the Gaza and the West Bank. And then in 1967, in June, there was a war that lasted 6 days. And Israel took back those areas. from Egypt and Jordan. And part of the agreement would have been, it was called Land for Peace. Israel was to give up it was 22%, those Gaza and West Bank made up 22%, so 78% was Israeli, and then the 22% was neutral. It was supposedly internationally controlled. But in 1967, the Israelis took over the West Bank and Gaza. And the Arabs wanted at least those two back. They wanted to have control of those two. And fast forward to 1993, the Oslo Accords. You've heard of the Oslo Accords, Jimmy Carter?
No, that's afterwards.
Yeah, I know, that's in 1993. From 1960,
Yeah.
I think I've lost the like. From 1967, see if it works. So the Six-Day War was in June of 1967, right? And then fast forward to 1993, and there was the Oslo Accords, and Jimmy Carter.
No, that was not Jimmy Carter, that was done in the Clinton
There's
administration.
what?
Jimmy Carter that's the 79.
That's true.
agreement, yeah.
That's true. That's true. I'm sorry, it wasn't Jimmy Carter who's involved. I wanted to put Jimmy Carter in somewhere.
Yeah, that was where
Pardon me?
Bill Clinton and
Sorry.
Senator Mitchell, who had worked in Northern
That's
Ireland, also went and participated with
Yeah.
in those negotiations.
Carter had brought together Sadat and Rabin in the late 70s.
That's true.
That was the agreement.
Thank you. Thank you
Peace
very much.
accord between Egypt and Israel.
Yeah, I don't even have that one because there was not much.
Well, you were the Nobel Prize, if you recall.
Yeah, I know.
Controversial, yes.
I know.
So Carter was involved in that.
Yeah, thank you very much. 1993 was Oslo, and the goal was to have the PLO recognize Israel and become to recognize Israel.
Okay.
And they did recognize Israel, and Israel then made the PLO like subcontractors to them. They could administer the West Bank, and they were like the police in the West Bank, and they were given a lot of money to do that. So 2006, there were elections, and that was a big one because Hamas agreed to participate. They had become more political, and they agreed to participate in these elections. And lo and behold, they won. And the next year, there was a huge embargo put onto Gaza, that whole area. And for trade, it really destroyed the economy. And it's been going on 17 years now. So that is why the UN has played such a big role in Gaza, because of the embargo and because they're really termed as refugees. And under the mandate of the UN, refugees, they have to have some assistance. So then, okay, so now we're back to where we began, and that is today, and what's happening today. And so from here, I just would like to bring up some of the repercussions of what is happening at this moment in the United States and even through the world. And I forgot to mention that the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, condemned Israel for plausible genocide. And the ICC, the International Criminal Court, fairly recently, are applying to arrest the leaders of both Hamas and also Netanyahu and Gallant, Yoav Gallant. Okay, so that's going on right now. And the American government is outraged that this should happen to an ally. So I'll just go through some of the laws that have been passed. Like the most recent one is H.R. 8282.
Oh, you want to, you have a slide for that.
Oh, do I have a slide? Yeah, and so you can see.
No, this has been passed, or this is just a bill?
It has been passed, but it hasn't been implemented
It's been passed in the House.
in the House.
Oh,
But
okay,
it
no,
hasn't
but it
been.
hasn't gotten to the Senate,
It
so it's
hasn't
not a
gotten
law.
It is not a law yet. But even, you know,
Right.
these are the attitudes, and this is what's happening politically. So to impose sanctions with respect to the International Criminal Court engaged in any effort to investigate, arrest, detain, or prosecute any protected person in the United States and its allies. It's called the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act. If anybody wants to have a look at that. Also, in May there was an analysis done of a new law that has been proposed, and it was introduced by a couple of Republicans, and it is basically to extend the benefits of Servicemen Civil Relief Act and Uniformed Services Employment to American citizens serving in the Israeli Defense Forces. These are the same benefits that they're not everything, they're not like army benefits, veterans, totally, but these are what's given to reservists and members of the National Guard. This is a letter by senators to the International Criminal Court warning them not to do anything to the leaders of Israel as they had deemed. So, and also we're seeing a real shutdown in free speech. Huge shutdown in free speech. Like even I've been involved with trying to get a resolution for a ceasefire to stop killing people. Humanitarian aid, release of the hostages, passed in Red Bank. And we had one meeting where we were inundated with people with Israeli flags and calling us extremists. This is where it is today, and that's why I really appreciate that, you know, we're having, you know, we'll have a good discussion afterwards. It's a real hot topic, and we're seeing students being arrested and professors being arrested, some of them put into isolation, solitary confinement. We're seeing articles, scientific articles being quashed, like the Law Journal, Harvard quashed one, written by a Palestinian. Actually, it was just research done and the laws that are being affected. And Columbia also destroyed the website that this article was on. So, and also the survivors' family of the raid and the massacre on October 7th, they are suing, they have engaged a very high reputation law firm to go after the pro-Palestinian supporters in the United States and the groups. And then there are these 4 laws. Please bear with me with these because these are really important. The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. The bill passed the US House of Representatives and now in the Senate. It conflates First Amendment protected political speech critical of the Israeli government and the state with anti-Semitism. So, if there's a criticism of the Israeli government, it's deemed anti-Semitism. If passed, this bill will chill the free speech of all Americans. The House passed this bill and is now awaiting a vote in the Senate. Now remember, the majority of Democrats are voting for these too. The majority, the vast majority, are voting for these. Even Cologne is voting for these. Another one, I can give the number 6408, amends the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to terminate the tax-exempt status of terrorist supporting organizations. It would give a single US official the authority to strip non-profit organizations of their tax-exempt status with virtually no limitations or accountability, simply because the organizations have viewpoints that officials or presidential administration disagrees with. 7914, accountability for terrorists, this is almost done. Accountability for terrorist perpetrators of October 7th. This bill would criminalize Palestinians beyond the State Department's already politicized foreign terrorist organization process by enacting sanctions against Palestinian organizations that have not been designated a terrorist organization. So they haven't been designated a terrorist organization, but they're criminalizing them. It would set a precedent that allowed Congress to implement sanctions on organizations that administration officials have not found to meet the criteria for designation. And then the last one here. These are really serious. Talk about the McCarthy era. This is very, very, very scary at this time. 7921, the Countering Anti-Semitism Act. It would codify and further entrench the narrative that the pro-Palestine movement is responsible for the anti-Semitism seen in the US. It is a continuation of Congress's focus on combating anti-Semitism at a time when Arab and especially Palestinian Americans are being targeted and attacked across the country. So it's almost like a wake-up call. You know, we're all affected by this. And so, I don't think I have anything else to add. Once again, I want to thank you very, very, very much for this. And Eric was a great help.
All right.
Here you go. Take it away.
All right, so I guess I'm going to share this microphone. I'm going to bring it around, and then when you're responding, I'll try and get the microphone back to you.
Could I do one last thing,
Yeah.
please? Can I just, you know, I'm Irish, and the Irish love poetry and the arts, and I would just like to read a poem, if you don't mind. Is that all right? Okay, it's by a poet called Refat Al-Arir, and he was a professor of literature, and he was the first professor to teach Hebrew literature in an Islamic university. He was a poet and a writer. And on December 6th, along with his brother's son, his sister, and her 3 children, he was killed by the military attack by the Israelis. And remember, in this part of the world, kites are very important. You know, they represent freedom and all. So it's called If I Must Die. If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad, and who left in a blaze, and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale. Thank you for bearing with me.
You can hang on to that. And I'll try and take the questions and comments. And let's see. There you go.
My question is, how do you get most of your source material? Our son-in-law is Palestinian American,
Yeah,
and they're raising their family as Muslims in, here in the United States,
Yeah.
in New Jersey. And he's always sending us a lot of information
yeah,
from various people over there that he
Yeah.
knows, whatnot. And just yesterday, he was saying that, he was telling us, we saw him yesterday, that the Americans had involvement in that,
Al-Nasrat.
yes, and we're like, what? We're looking all over, there's nothing on it anywhere. I mean, you're the first person that I've seen that was able to corroborate what he was telling us. And so I'm just curious, like I know you said, is it through Amnesty International? It's just because it's so hard to get true information. Some of the stuff he sends, I think, is a little inflated, from various sources. And I mean, I read Haaretz,
Yeah,
which is very liberal. So I get some of the closest thing, I think, to sort of Israeli press that's somewhat believable. But
yeah.
I'm just wondering, it's a real problem.
Yeah, the press in Israel really basically has been cut out, the objective press, which is really hard. So I get information from Amnesty and other human rights groups. And also there are some Israeli scholars who, in 1981, these Israeli scholars, there's a few of them, Pape is one, and Finkelstein is another. There's other scholars, Mearsheimer, I can give you a list of some of the authentic ones. And they were brought up, the first two, Pape and Finkelstein, were brought up in the religious tradition in Israel. They were educated there and they believed everything. And they ended up in university, I think maybe in Oxford or Cambridge, of course. And so in 1981, the Archives of Israel was opened. And that allowed scholars to take a look at the story. And what they discovered is basically what I've told you now, horrified them. So you will see, so I listened to their lectures, and right beside you is a great scholar, Anne Davis from Red Bank, and she has been a great source. She listens to all of the UN hearings from beginning to end. And, she gets the information right from the source. So it is hard to get it, but a lot of it is through actual videos that are generated from human beings in Palestine and the West Bank and in Israel as to what's happening. Like, this is where it is, and this is the explosion, and this is my mother, and this, this kind of direct. And thank goodness for that, because we're able to get a bigger picture. Yeah.
With Iran funding Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, Palestinian Jihad, and I have no idea how many others, do you think Palestine is using, do you think Iran is using these groups, all right, as sort of useful idiots to get their aims?
Well, you mean, is Palestine, is Iran arming Hamas, or, is
No,
that...
Iran, they're arming, they are, right, funding
Hezbollah.
and
in
Hamas.
Lebanon. Well, Iran is its own unique country. There's a lot of myth about their involvement with what they want. They don't want an all-out war because they know that Israel has the backing of the United States.
Well, they tried and failed miserably, so.
Well, from the most recent incident,
Right.
it was Israel who killed two of their diplomats in Syria, in an embassy in Syria, in the Iranian embassy in Syria. So the response by the Iranians was to send like 200 little, like the drones that you can get in Costco, or over to Israel to drop whatever and to terrorize But there wasn't a lot of damage or oomph behind it, because also they have that dome. Yeah, and you know, we have been spending, our taxpayers' money has been used 26 billion, I think, for this war, I believe. And there's a promise of 3.8 billion each year until 2028.
Well, my question was, do you think Iran is using these terrorist groups to further their aim by funding them?
I have no indication of that Iran is doing it. I have no idea. I think, you know, we've got all of the big powers funding the Israeli government and the IDF. And also, I forgot to add, like in the West Bank, it's been horrific. That was supposed to be neutral, and Israel took it over, right? It's about the size of Delaware. And there are like 600,000 illegal settlers. And somebody just sent an incredible article about how the settlers can do anything to the residents without any accountability or punishment.
Everywhere.
Yeah, and what happens is that if, say, an old man is attacked, right, by a settler, a lot of them are very, very aggressive. An old man is attacked by a settler and is bleeding or has damage. What can the family do? The only way they can file a complaint is to go into a settlement, like these gated communities, to find the police. Because it's the army that controls the West Bank. So they are responsible. So they stand by and see all of these things happening. And in fact, some of the property in Gaza is being sold for real estate in New Jersey and Connecticut. Keeler, whatever that real estate agency is, Keeler or something, it's based in Texas, I believe. They are having auctions for homes in the West Bank. So in 2005, I think, was it Rabin who got the settlers out of Gaza, but he was killed.
Sharon.
Sharon.
Yeah, he was not killed, but he had a stroke and was
Right.
in a vegetative state for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know, it's I don't know. Iran. Nothing justifies what's happening, in my estimation. And Ann Davis, could you add? Nothing
The
justifies.
backstory I heard on the Iranian attack on Israel is that it was negotiated with the United States. The United States was told Netanyahu they attacked the Iranian consulate in Syria without notifying the U.S. The U.S. did not want to get in a war, and so the U.S. and Iran negotiated what their retaliation would be. And that's why it looked lame, if you will, but it is what it is. And you cannot trust the mainstream media. Lie after lie after lie is published in the New York Times almost every day. You know, The Guardian is not much better, the BBC is not much better, the Washington Post is not much better. So our government wants to spread propaganda, and that's what's going on. So you have to go to other sources.
Is Al Jazeera one of those? I don't know, man.
Al Jazeera?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been kicked out of Israel.
Al Jazeera is a source, Democracy Now! Is a source,
Yeah.
and you can go to YouTube and you can watch the proceedings of the United Nations and the reports that come out of their committees and the discussions.
I can ask you a question, since I have my answer. So how do we get out of this mess? I mean, you know, both among Americans who are so divided on this and a solution over there. I
Well,
mean,
you know, that's what I was hoping to achieve today. That the humanists of all people would be able to come up with a solution. Come on. It's hard, like over the years, Hamas, you know, in a way I can compare Hamas to the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. They were the resistance movement in Ireland against the English. And they were a terrorist organization. You know, they bombed, they killed, they did awful things. But over the years, they became politicized and political. And a couple of years ago, they became Sinn Féin, ourselves it's called. And they got like the top votes in 2020. They're going down now. The independents are taking over with the recent election. But they became, they negotiated, they showed who they were, and there were people who, like my father, believe it or not, my father was 22 years older than my mother, and he never talked about it, but he was a member of the IRA in the early 20s, when there was a civil war. And he had a drawer full of medals that I never even knew. He wasn't a fighter, he was a strategist, and he surveyed a spy maybe. And the other part is, and he was a very peaceful man, but he had to defend himself. Even the ANC, Nelson Mandela was deemed a terrorist for using force. What do you do to protect your family? What do you do? Hamas has tried over the years to, well, the people of Palestine have had intifadas, which meant that they had peaceful protests that were made very violent by the IDF, the Israel Defense Force. In 1922, so 1922, when you think back, the British mandate was in 1920, and they were over there doing all kinds of good stuff in Palestine, and so they were doing good stuff in Ireland too. And they had a paramilitary group called the Black and Tans because they wore black and tan uniforms. And my father was, my grandfather, my mother's father, so it's my grandfather. My father was involved as an IRA person. My grandfather was just a farmer living in the country, and he was married and had my mother, who was 6 years old, and my grandmother was pregnant. So on a Sunday afternoon, there's a huge banging at the door is pushed in, it's Black and Tans. My grandmother's pregnant, she's screaming. They grab my grandfather and they drag him outside, they line him up against a barn, and the guy cocks his gun, it's called, I guess, and takes a shot, and it doesn't work. And the second one didn't work. So he was thrown back in, but the neighbor was killed in the next one. So these Black and Tans were the same people who ended up in Palestine, used by the British against the Palestinians. They got practice in Ireland. So, what is the solution? I think, first of all, within the United States, we have to have a political system that's not corrupted by money. Because, we need clean election reform. Because the money is the colonizer in this country. Our politicians are colonized by corporations and money. I know. Democrats, Republicans, everybody have their hands out. And people like us, we might have different views, but we're not being represented. It's terrible. Even the presidential election coming up. My God, I saw on TV Jonathan Clapper. I don't know if you know him. He's a guy who's a funny guy.
Yeah.
And he was interviewing a guy, and he said, if I put a gun to your head and you're voting in this election, which one would you take? He said, shoot me. So,
Let me take another question.
Hi, my concern has to do with the split of Islamism and jihadism as an ideology, kind of building off of the other gentleman's concerns about like Iran and, you know, just as an ideology, how that's spreading. Because I share, you know, your concern with human rights, and I worry personally about the split of Islamism and jihadism.
so could you elaborate a wee bit more on that one?
All right. Islamism is like a very, very strict conservative Muslim ideology,
Sure you can.
and they don't specifically take out like violent acts. That would be the jihadis, but the Islamists do support the jihadis and give aid and comfort. And that's not all Muslims. That's not what I'm saying. That's not but there's definitely been a spread of Islamism and jihadism. You look at Hamas; they call themselves the Islamic
Resistance
movement, thank you. And, you know, they're looking to spread like Sharia law, like where, you know, women are property and girls get, you know, like all
Okay, I get it.
ideologies that.
I get it. Can I just say one thing, and then Eric Ellis, this one was, somebody, I appreciate that you're asking. Somebody sent me a copy of the 1917 principles of Hamas, right? Because everybody says that about Sharia law. 2017, I'm sorry. I'm way back in ancient times. 2017, the ratified, and they have principles, Hamas have the policies and principles of Hamas. And I really would advise you and everybody here to read them. Because in it, women have rights. It's not as extreme as everybody is making it out to be. It was extreme in its violence and what it did, sure. But overall, if you read the principles of Hamas, it's not a scary thing. And like the IRA was given a chance, the ANC was given a chance not to be terrorists. And look what's happened. You know, the ANC brought down apartheid. And I think what has to happen in a way, we have to stop this apartheid and stop the immediate killings of these people. And starvation. It's like an engineered famine.
Obviously, it's been very complex, and religion is a complicated factor. The interesting thing is, if you look at the tragedy of the 20th century, if you look at the 20th century, the conflict in the 20th century, if you look at the political Palestinian groups, most of them were not religious. The PLO was not a Muslim organization; it was secular. And also Arab nationalism was a huge movement throughout the 20th century. And so really the rise of political Islam was there, and it takes bits and pieces. It's only recently that these groups, these forces, these interests have played a larger role in this conflict. If we look at it from the last 100 years, for example. It doesn't mean that it's not important. It doesn't mean that there aren't risk factors. All I'm saying is that the picture is far more nuanced when you look at it broadly. I think in terms of the RA example, I would say that the PLO is a closer analog, in my opinion, than Hamas. I think Hamas is a little trickier. I don't know if I would want to get on the Hamas bandwagon. However, when I look at this conflict, especially in America, what gets conflated so often, and this has been the case for decades, is that it's the militant group is conflated with the millions of civilians. And so you only heard about the PLO for decades. You very rarely heard about Palestinians. Even now, whether it's rhetoric coming from Washington, D.C., or Israel, or other camps, Hamas, 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 Hamas. Hamas is very small compared to the vast majority of the Palestinian people. And we need to be mindful that yes, Hamas is a force, but I think the people that we're probably most concerned about here, and we should be, are ordinary people, ordinary families. And so be mindful of that conflation that's been going on for a very long time, and be mindful that, for example, there was a difference between the PLO and Hamas. Some would say none, some would say many, I would say moderate. And there are definitely issues with what we would call political jihadi Islam, legitimate. I would say though the Palestinian Israeli conflict, it's not as much of a role. It's this, all the issues that she's raised, very complex, all the issues that she's raised are equally, I would say, even more important. So,
Thank you. Eric? Gentlemen.
This is on? So I think it's also very important. Gotcha. So I think it's also very important to remember the political contexts in which jihadism and radical Islamic terrorism takes place. American imperialism, British imperialism, French imperialism has shaped these regions for little over 8 decades. And to say that I don't want to spread terrorism is a noble goal, right? Especially religious terrorism. We all know the religious fervor that goes into anything is justified now because I have religion to back my claim. We all know the impact that could have. We saw it with 9/11. We saw it with, we see it in this country right now with evangelical Christianity. But I think it's very important to understand the development of these nations in the context of imperialism. Because for the past 80 years, they haven't been left alone. They haven't been able to build schools. They haven't been able to build roads. They haven't been able to build any sort of infrastructure that would get them away from religion to begin with. Right? We see time and time again countries that have the best social institutions, for example, have the least religious residents. Look at Denmark, look at Sweden, look at Finland. And then you see a country like Iraq. Not to mention American support of the most radical groups in the region, such as the Mujahideen in the 80s in Afghanistan, and Saddam's Iraq before 2003, I believe. My history is not amazing on this. So I think it's important to understand the economic issues that go into funding radical terrorist organizations, rather than just saying it's bad. But my question is from my understanding, most of us in this room would support a Palestinian state, but with an organization like Hamas leading the charge for that state, what kind of human rights could we expect on behalf of the Palestinian people if Hamas were to be the forefront leader of a Palestinian state?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I would say that we have a failed project right now with, at this moment, with human rights, and it's supposed to be governed by the most democratic country in the Middle East, Israel. And what we're seeing is a total absence of human rights, and actually great cruelty. So, who knows? We don't know. Like Iran, to begin with, had democratic elections, and the United States interfered and put in Pavlov, whatever his name was, the Shah. So complicated, but it's not complicated. And I think you gave a very good summary of the situation. You know, where the areas have been dominated by colonists. And that's why I'm saying that the political system is now colonized by corporations and special interests. Period. And that's very, very dangerous. And what, you know, let's stop the killing, let's feed the people. Let's release all of those Israeli hostages or wherever they are in Gaza, and release the 10,000 Palestinian prisons that are taken in for protesting or for their beliefs, and all of those children, and 80 women, at least 80 women are in prison. We don't have a clue what's happening. They won't even let the Red Cross in to see, to evaluate. There's nobody in there to evaluate what's going on. And nobody is in Gaza, really, to evaluate what's going on. So we have to take Israeli IDF word for everything.
One last question, or maybe two.
Okay.
We're beyond noon, so
Okay.
we're going to try and wrap up very soon. Okay.
My question is, what is happening in Israel now? How strong are, or if they exist, moderate forces in Israel? And if they do exist, it would be to our interest to do everything we can to help them.
Yeah. Well, I just saw a statistic that over 62% of the Israeli population who are reviewed support what's happening in Gaza. And they
then
want...
the question is, what is their media telling them?
Exactly. That's the truth. That's the great question. Nobody knows. They're not getting it. They're not getting the information.
Well, when they do find the information, I would hope that
I
they
agree completely.
Terrible.
I agree completely. And you know, we can't just pinpoint Netanyahu. It's like the whole Likud party and the followers. Israel is in a bit of a mess, and what's going to happen, I predict, is there's going to be a huge amount of anti-Semitism after all of this, which is terrible. Yes, yes, and that's the worst thing. You know, and who wants to discriminate against somebody for a particular religion or belief? It's outrageous. I think we have to hold our politicians accountable, and we have to do something about just a one-party system. It's called Democrat and Republican, with Democrats being slightly more socially conscious.
I think you guys put your finger on the problem, and it is that we have one fanatical, fundamentalist, extreme religious ideology against another fundamentalist, fanatical, religious ideology. And there's no, I don't know if there's any way out of this, because each one of these have to take and possess that mountain where all these things happened, where Al-Aqsa Mosque is now, but used to be, I think, Temple Mount. So neither one will rest until they have it in their possession. We had this back in the Middle Ages, where the Christians had to have it, and what that lasted 400 years. The majority of Israel, the people who are making babies, are the fundamentalist, fanatic, right-wing, religious Jews, not the secular Jews. They're not having babies anymore. And same here too. So we're going to have that conflict in New Jersey in a little bit, in 50 years. We're going to have a majority of fundamentalist, religious, right-wing extremist Jews ruling, you know, in here. The third largest city in New Jersey is Lakewood now. So it'll be the first. So what do we do against this religious extremist surgeons. I think the people who are an answer to this are the secular liberal Jews who reflexively are supporting Israel without any conditions. They are the ones who need to step up and lead us in saying to Israel, no, this can't happen, this is not the way to treat Palestinians. Okay, we took that in hindsight, it would have been much better, because the original problem was what Germany did to the Jews in World War II, the Holocaust. It would have been, in hindsight, much better if Britain had carved out, say, Lower Saxony, right above Holland, and gave it to them, and now we wouldn't have this extreme fundamentalist religious crazy people at each other's throats. And then that's really what's going on in the West Bank. They're taking Judea and Samaria back. So 600,000 settlers there. So I think that the lead has to be the secular, liberal, progressive Jews. Bernie Sanders is trying to do it a little bit, but he needs a lot of support. That's where I need to say, like my friend said when I sent the article about the Israeli prisons, he said, oh, this is Abu Ghraib. Yes, but in Abu Ghraib, we were able to charge those soldiers with the U.S. justice system and bring them to, put them in jail or whatever. But with there's no accountability in Israel. The accountability should be the $4 billion that we're giving every year to Israel, which is given in the form of free 2,000-pound bombs and all kinds of other ammunition and arms that they're using against this mostly defenseless people. So yes, Hamas needs to be eliminated, but maybe there's a way to move it forward to a place where it becomes like Sinn Féin. It's not out of the realm of possibilities. If we, there's a Turkish proverb that says when you're thrown in the water, and this is a people coming from Central Asia, there wasn't any water, you hold on to the snake, which is the one that strangles you or stings you to death. So Palestinians have no other people. Their own kin have abandoned them in the form of Morocco abandoning them when Trump gave them Western Sahara, and Bahrain and UAE abandoned them because they were going to get F-35s or whatever. So I think that our hope is in what the liberal Jewish community in this country who needs to say to Israel, no more, you can't do this to these people, because for the sake of Israel to survive another 1,000 years where it is, and not be thrown out during the next Third World War, because the United States is hands full with Russia and China, it will be run over by its neighbors. It needs to come to an agreement and allow for a Palestinian state and allow those people self-determination, liberty, and pursuit of that.
All right, so we've got, did you want to say any last word? We're a little bit beyond time, so I do want to try and wrap it up. I just think I need to wrap it up. But thank you all for coming. I think we had a reasonably contained discussion. A lot of interesting things to reflect on. But I'm glad we had a chance to have this out of it. And go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to say, we have to think, what can we do as individuals? We can't wait for somebody else to do it. Think about that. Think about sanctions. We're on a Zoom call with a South African amnesty group who were able to bring down apartheid. And one of the big things was sanctions and divestment, because money talks. And clean election reform. It has to be. It has to be. I think Public Citizen does a lot with that. And I would just like to thank especially the young people out there. They are principled, brave, peaceful, clear-headed, and committed to justice at their own personal sacrifice. And I really want to give them a standing ovation. Thank you very, very much.
And thanks for many of you who are new faces for coming out and participating in the discussion and listening to the discussion. Hope you come out again to our events and hear other topics as well. And you can reach out to me, comments that you have. I'll be around till I'll be the last one out here, so you can come.
We have a petition here. If anybody
You
wants to
wanted
see
to, yeah.
If anybody wants to see a petition.
Yeah, there's a petition at the welcome table. Would you like to take a look and sign that?
And also, I have like a sign-up sheet if anybody would like to just be part of what we can do in the future.